This is Dallas Dirt. I'm your host, April Towery, and we are here today with District 14 City Plan Commissioner Kingston. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
So the City Plan Commission has recently been meeting just about every week on the Comprehensive Land Use Plan Forward Dallas. Is that correct?
Yes.
Frequently.
And
these are long meetings. They typically start at 9 a.m. You've got other zoning cases to hear, other issues that come up. So you devote a lot of time to this.
I personally spend about 75 hours a month on CPC matters, and with Forward Dallas, that's ramped up to about 110 hours a month.
What kind of work are you doing specifically with Forward Dallas? There's been some, well, first of all, tell me what Forward Dallas is.
Forward Dallas, it's actually Forward Dallas 2.0. It's our city's comprehensive land use plan. By state law, we are required to have one, but it is not dictated in the law what it has to look like. So what we are currently doing is updating our current land use plan. It's a citywide policy document that looks to what the future of the city should look like in a number of different areas. That would include, in this case, housing, which is critically important, transportation, environmental justice. We are also looking at environmental impact and some other issues in how we use the land that the city has and how we will grow as a city.
And the city already has an older version of Forward Dallas that is in place. It's old. And how frequently is that referred to when you're hearing a rezoning case?
So when a zoning application comes before the Plan Commission, part of what staff does is evaluate how that application comports with not only our existing comprehensive land use plan, but other things like an area plan or maybe other zoning that's in place. And then let's say there's an area plan. For example, in my district, the largest planned development district is PD 193, which is the Oak Lawn plan. And so it'll look at that area plan and see how that's impacted by the zoning application. And all of those different existing either plans or zoning will be referenced in staff's briefing and recommendations to us.
There's been some concern about multifamily development near or even within single-family neighborhoods.
Yes, I've noticed.
You've noticed? Okay.
I've noticed that. Yeah.
All right. What happened? How did the public get so confused, if they are, or are these concerns valid? I mean,
I don't think the public is confused. There has been a movement across not just the United States, but in other countries as well, to increase density in places in order to accommodate the need for greater housing. And in the United States, that has taken the shape of adding what we call gentle density, smaller multifamily, whether that be duplex, fourplex, eightplex development in places where it has not traditionally been. Councilmember West has been asking city planning staff for a couple of years to brief the council on what it would look like if we put up to 10 units on any vacant lot in the city, because we do have a lot of vacant lots, and how would that look if that was one way we addressed the need for housing. And for whatever reason, staff just was not doing that. And finally, he got a 5-signature memo. He and 4 other council members put that on the agenda, which if staff won't do something a council member asks, they can force it with a 5-signature memo. So that happened at the tail end of last year. And when that came to council, it was clear that the city council was not going to entertain passing something that looked like that. And then fast forward a month or so, the staff brought Forward Dallas to the Plan Commission with that exact recommendation. And about that time is when we started having public engagement on Forward Dallas. Forward Dallas has been in the works for about 4 years, and staff says they've been doing public engagement. I don't know who they've been talking to. Maybe people they thought would agree with them, but clearly not the public at large, because it has clearly been a surprise what they have been proposing to most people in the city. And these are people that are fairly engaged. normally. So in my estimation, staff has brought forward an idea the council has already resoundingly rejected, and they continue to bring that forward. And we've continued to have a number of public meetings all over the city where this idea is being discussed, and it does not appear to have political legs. Unfortunately, I think that what that has done is polarize the community, where you have people who live in stable single-family neighborhoods now unwilling to discuss any modest changes in density, and housing advocates who see a real need for changes in how we do housing, and there's no middle ground that people are willing to discuss. And so what I hope will happen before this comes to CPC and eventually council is that some cooler heads will prevail, and we will start to have some of those much needed discussions, because we do need housing. If you take a look at our rental occupancy rates and you take a look at what's happening with our for sale pricing, there's no other conclusion that we don't have enough housing. Couple that with the rates at which people are moving out of the city, it's clear that we don't have enough housing, and we really don't have enough affordable housing or workforce housing to house the people who want to live in the city. So we need to do something different. Now, what that different looks like, it can be something we can discuss. And there are a lot of good ideas out there that are getting drowned out by factions that are sort of pitted against one another because of the way this has been handled by staff.
Well, first of all, that was the best explanation of the 5-signature memo and the Forward Dallas conflation I've heard, and I've talked to a lot of people about it. So what has been your modus operandi in dealing with the public on this to make sure that they understand what's being proposed and what sort of freedom CPC has in order to make changes to the draft? And
well, so first of all, we don't even have a complete copy of the draft yet, which I find frustrating. We've had, in my opinion, too much staff resources for too long on this project to be where we are with what we have and what we don't have at this stage of the game. And I find that frustrating. And I think the public finds that frustrating. And so here we are, kind of, let's say, more than halfway through the CPC review of this. I don't have a complete set of the document. We have not really done a good job of using good visual aids and teaching materials to help educate public about concepts we're talking about. And one of the early criticisms of this plan and presentation of this plan is it uses a lot of jargon that is common with planners, but not common with the public. And that automatically creates this distrust among members of the public because it seems as though you're intentionally talking over them. And so we have done a bad job, the collective we have done a bad job of communicating these concepts in a way that people can understand them. And that has instantly bred distrust of the concepts in the process in general. It's just making it that much harder to get to where we need to be as a city. And what that has also done is given some of the advocates on one position or another an opportunity to seize upon that distrust and further miscommunicate or spread misinformation to play on those fears. In my experience, when you're talking about someone's home or someone's school, that is the quickest way to get someone's attention and to instill fear in them. That is what is happening. Are purposefully advocates for one position or another are purposefully disseminating information that is clearly false. And it's hard to combat that when you don't have good teaching tools.
What's the solution to slow it down, to create an additional place type, to bring in another advisor or consultant to manage this plan? What can we do now?
Well, it's interesting because of the way that city staff is changing pretty rapidly. The city manager has resigned and gone to Austin, and the interim manager rearranged staff. There's a new assistant city manager who has a reputation of being very competent. She is now over urban planning, and we also have a new director over this department. So we have essentially 2 new sheriffs in town. I am hopeful that they will use some of their prior successes in tools to take a look at what isn't working and implement some things they've done in the past to kind of reshape the conversation and bring about some level of better communication skills on some of these things. If you look at how politics in the United States are, there are people on the extremes, but a lot of people are in the middle. That's really true for how people look at this comp plan. There are people on the extremes. There's a very loud, but what I would characterize as a minority group of what I'll call the single-family homeowners, and they sort of rove to each one of these meetings in the various districts. And then there is a loud group of housing advocates who, they have their message. And then there's a lot of people in the middle who maybe support some, but not all of these different positions. And they are sort of drowned out by people on either end. And a lot of folks just don't have time to be going to all these meetings. They're trying to work and raise kids, do the volunteer activities they're passionate about, and they're just not going to be as engaged. And when you look at how many people vote in this city, you already know we don't have a lot of civic engagement on a municipal level. So I'm hopeful that when all of this shakes out, by the time we get to actually making the hard decisions, we have gotten enough feedback from enough people. You can balance the interests and say, okay, like most things, you're not going to make all of the people happy. You're just going to have to say, you're going to get some of what you want, you're going to get some of what you want. And in the end, everybody's going to see that it's not perfect, but it's going to work.
What do you want? What would you like to see?
I have not decided exactly what I think the right balance is. There's a lot of data out there that suggests certain things have a really strong track record. And then there's a lot of data that people point to that I personally don't think has enough longevity in the market to know whether that's reliable data. A lot of these concepts, people will point to 5 years of data and say, look, it's proven. And I'm like, I'm not sure 5 years of data in another city with another climate or that has better public transportation or has different variables in Dallas is enough information for us to upset our whole apple cart and make a decision on. For example, there's a big movement at City Hall to eliminate all parking minimums. And they say, well, if we eliminate all parking minimums, that will create more affordable housing. And to me, that's like, have you ever seen the South Park episode, The Underpants Gnomes?
I have not.
Okay, so it's step 1, steal underpants. Step 3, make profit. And nobody can really describe how step 2 works. To me, that's the parking minimums. Step 1, eliminate parking minimums. Step 3, have cheaper housing. There's a lot in the middle that has a lot less detail. And when you start talking about a place like Dallas, where we have a different climate than Minneapolis, we have a much larger geographic area to cover, we don't have the same type of public transit, you have to take all of that into account when you make those decisions. And I'm not seeing a lot of that type of thought given to some of these policy changes. And I'm not willing to sacrifice stable communities without more information or without some, test cases to see how we should really be implementing that type of idea. And if it takes us a little longer to get it right, then I would rather do that than make a decision that ends up giving property owners vested rights we can't easily undo and end up with a decades-long problem that we have to live with. And those type of things are buried within this comprehensive land use plan in the details that are being overshadowed by this discussion about multifamily.
Do you think anyone who is working on this plan is actually being shady or malicious and hiding in the fine print these things too?
I don't know if I would characterize anybody as being shady or malicious, but I do think that there are some people who have some agendas that might be professionally oriented that might not be. Let me put it this way. There seems to be this idea that we should have a one-size-fits-all approach over the entire city, and that baffles me. I think it's okay to say parts of the southern part of the city get to have different rules than the northern part of the city because we have disenfranchised parts of the southern part of the city for so long. It's okay to say if we're going to be honest about having equity, then maybe they should have some protections that stronger parts of the city who have been given a leg up for so long don't necessarily have to have. Or if we're going to invest in certain areas that have been historically not invested in, it's okay to invest more in those areas because they have been disenfranchised for so long. And I don't see there is some environmental justice aspects of the plan. I'm not saying they're not there, but this sort of idea that we'll just put a 9-plex anywhere there's a vacant lot ignores what we've always done in the southern part of the city. Oaklawn can absorb that in a way that parts of District 7 or District 3 can't. And so why aren't we having those conversations? To me, that seems lazy. It seems like what have we been doing, we have been doing for 3 or 4 years as we develop this comprehensive land use plan, and nobody's had those discussions.
Well, it seems like the blanket answer to those questions is just because we make a place type, which is what they're calling these designations for like what you want to go where. And there's a community residential place type that allows for other things besides single family home.
Right.
And that's what people are mad about in general. There's been the counter argument to that anger is just because your neighborhood is in a community residential place type doesn't mean that someone can just swoop in and build.
I agree with that. I think that that's part of the misinformation that's being circulated. I saw a flyer that said if ForwardDallas gets passed, basically you can kiss historic districts, conservation districts, and single-family communities goodbye. And I think that that's just false. I think that was never going to happen, and I think people said that to scare people. And I think that that's unfortunate because now you have a bunch of people that are legitimately scared, and they're reacting out of fear instead of reacting with accurate information. And when you have an angry or scared group of people, other people are going to be, they're going to suffer for that. So we're not going to get rid of conservation districts or historic districts or neighborhood stabilization areas. We are not going to just wholesale allow 9-plexes in the middle of single-family neighborhoods. But the city residential place type does recognize what's already on the ground in a lot of places. There are lots of neighborhoods across the city where we already don't have true single-family in what we consider single-family neighborhoods. My neighborhood is considered a single-family neighborhood. I can walk a block in any direction and find duplexes, 3-plexes, 4-plexes, 6-plexes that have been there for 100 years. I think really what a lot of people have objection to is not necessarily a duplex here or a 4-plex there. It's the form that is allowed to be built today versus what was historically built. And what we ought to be talking about is some developmental protections for infill that would protect neighborhoods if there's going to be that type of infill. What is it going to look like? And that's the conversation that we're not having. And that is the type of work that we should have been doing before we rolled out this plan so that people weren't saying, well, I don't want a 4-story or 3-story with a rooftop that shadows over these bungalows or these 2-story homes, because that's what people are afraid of. They want something that fits more within character of the neighborhood, which is possible, which is what some other cities are doing. And we're just not having those conversations. And why not? And I think that's some of the hard work that should have been done as part of a rollout of this package if we were serious about doing some infill development that was more than just single family. Because if we're being honest, a lot of parts of the city, it is not sustainable to have single-family homes on 7,500 to 10,000 square foot lots going forward because most people cannot afford that. If you're looking at lots in Old East Dallas that are going for $500,000 for the dirt, the economics of that is that the new home on that lot will be $1.5 to $2 million. Well, how many people can really afford to buy that? And what does it do to the community if that's the only people who can afford to live there? And what does it do to our institutions, like our churches, like our schools, like our local businesses, if the only people that live in that community are the people at that income level? That's why Tarrant County and Dallas County are forming a hole in the middle of a donut of the suburbs, because people can afford more of a home in the suburbs. And yet our cities, Fort Worth and Dallas, are the hub where everybody comes to play, to get medical care, to get education. And so our tax base is paying a disproportionate share for all of what the suburbs are leeching off of us, and we don't have an equitable way to recoup those expenses. So our taxpayers are paying a disproportionate share of that. Couple that with the fact that Dallas, like most other cities, single-family homes typically don't pay for all of the services that they demand. They are subsidized by the other land uses in the city. So just take District 14. Uptown is subsidizing Old East Dallas. Single-family homeowners do not like to hear that, but it's true. And in other parts of the city, it's even more true. So, all those sidewalks, fire departments, ambulances, police, water, sewer, parks that everybody likes to have, demands to have, that has to get paid for somehow. And the larger the lot that's consumed by one home, the less tax base we have to do that. And so those are hard conversations to have.
And so what is the biggest misconception that you're seeing, and what's the answer? What's your response to that?
The biggest misconception, intentional or not, is that the city is going to take action to eliminate single-family housing. And I just don't think that's true. I think that what we're talking about doing is creating opportunities that when there are locations that it makes sense to allow for general density, we will have tools in place to do that. And let me give you some examples. One of the things that we are seeing more and more of is what I call dead church sites. Church attendance is on the decline. Churches are failing or consolidating. And what do you do with a church facility that is oftentimes located in the middle of a residential neighborhood? You've got to do something with it. You can't just allow it to rot. So that's often a good location for some general density. Maybe it's a shared access community. Maybe it's a cottage court community. Maybe it's a small apartment complex. Maybe it's a good place for duplexes or townhomes. And so that's a great place to put some of what we're talking about, some of this missing middle housing that is naturally more affordable because we're using the land a little bit more efficiently, but it fits in well with the community, allows people to downsize to a smaller place, a smaller lot, or it allows someone to get into a community that they otherwise couldn't get into, get their kids into those schools and work their way up to the next bigger house or whatever. And these types of places exist all over the city, and people don't seem to mind them when they're there. But you start talking about putting them there, and they're all of a sudden like, well, not my neighborhood. But the idea that we're just going to let people put, an eightplex in between, they tore down a house in Lakewood, time to put up an eightplex. That's just not going to happen. Nothing that's happening in Forward Dallas is changing any zoning. Every zoning change is still going to have to go through public process where signs will be posted on the dirt. You will come down to City Hall for zoning change at CPC that will then have to get approved by council. There will be a public process. Every single piece of land has to go through that. So every single rezoning will get an opportunity for public engagement. This is just sort of a concept document to say, here's either what's already on the ground, or here are some ideas of what we envision going forward.
That's it for this episode of Dallas Dirt. Thank you, Melissa Kingston, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you.